Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Well, good morning. Today's a big talk. I'm excited to give this talk today because it's the culmination of my practice of a very long time. And so to begin with, the important thing for me to do is to take a moment to be thankful for my teachers. There's one of them right there. I'm thankful for Ben and Brian and LP Chali and all the monks at IIMC Redmond and Wat Buddha, Oregon. I'm thankful for the expanded teachers that have been part of my Buddhist upbringing, the Great Vow Zen Temple, Hogan and Chosen Bays Roshi, and all the great teachers that I've gotten to experience over the years with YouTube videos and talks. And I'm thankful for that because it all comes together in one place. And I'm truly hopeful that today I'm able to give some words and you're able to hear these words. And it really does go a long ways to helping alleviate suffering for you. So that's my aspiration. I'm going to give it my best. So, Satipatthana Sutta. So, sati means mindfulness, and the meaning of Satipatthana is frames of reference or foundations of mindfulness. And the idea here is to give us a place to look at where we can be mindful and what mindfulness is about. And as I was putting this presentation, I was struck by a few things about this. One being that the crowd that the Buddha goes to teach, they do a lot of things. They've got a lot of techniques that they use that are complicated yoga techniques and complicated worship techniques and this, 42 step technique to do this. And he actually comes with something that is so elegant and simple that it's almost easy to oversee it. It's almost overlook it. And I think that it's important to see that in this teaching as he comes to something that he's really offering very simply, like out of the palm of his hand. But it's complicated, it's deep, and it approaches this most core part of what we all experience. So, one more thing, just before we start, I wanted to take a moment and talk about the translator who brought us this translation that we've been using, Thanissaro Bhikkhu. And read this little bit from Lion's Roar. So Thanissaro Bhikkhu is a monk in the Thai forest tradition, and after moving to Thailand and studying under the forest master Ajahn Fuon Jotiko for 10 years, he returned to the U.S. and co-founded the Metta Forest Monastery in San Diego, California, where he serves as the abbot, the translator of numerous suttas and classical texts. His most recent book on the Four Noble Truths, his books and many other teachings and translations can be found online at dhammatalks.org, and I would be remiss to not thank him for doing this translation for us. And this is the translation we've been using, and this translation uses this phrase, great frames of reference. And the other translations often use like the foundations, the four foundations of mindfulness. And we talked about at the very beginning how we're taking something that's very complicated and to understand it, we're breaking it down into parts. And I started at the very beginning by saying, imagine you go to clean out your garage and you want to figure out what you're going to do with all the stuff in your garage. So you separate it into little piles and you examine those piles carefully. Here's one that's going to go to donate someplace. Here's the stuff I'm going to throw away. And then this is the stuff that I really need to pay attention to and sort out. And this is essentially that. This is essentially giving us foundations of mindfulness that we can use to really examine what's going on and ask the big questions. So with that said, I am going to share my presentation and collectively we'll go through the Maha Satipatthana Sutta. So I have heard that on one occasion the Blessed One was staying in the Kuru country. Now there's a town of the Kurus called Kamasadama. There the Blessed One addressed the monks. Monks, Lord, the monks replied, The Blessed One said this: "This is the direct path for purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and stress, for the attainment of right method, and for the realization of unbinding." In other words, the four frames of reference. Which four? Mindfulness of the body, observing the body and bodily activities, including breathing, postures, and bodily parts. Mindfulness of feeling, noting the experience of feeling as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Mindfulness of mind, awareness of the mind state, such as concentrated, distracted, calm, or agitated. Mindfulness of mental qualities, contemplating various mental objects, including the five hindrances, the seven factors of awakening, and more. How does a monk remain focused on the body in and of itself? And here the Buddha gives us his direct instruction on meditation practice, anapanasati, or mindfulness of in and out breathing. And he says, become aware of your breath, put awareness to the front, and then pay attention. Is this a long breath? Is this a short breath? And you note if it's a long breath or a short breath. And this aids us in developing concentration and mindfulness. But as you think about it, I was saying earlier, this is a simple thing that he's giving as an instruction to people who are not used to simple things. And even as we do this practice and we go into trying to understand Buddhism, we overcomplicate this. I think this is just simply him saying, here's an example of mindfulness that you can experience right now. You sit with your legs crossed and you pay attention to what's happening. Notice that your breath is long or short, but it's not always the same. It comes and goes. You can't hold on to it. We can all agree on that when we look at it. It's not hard to see. The breath comes and goes, and there's this amount of concentration and energy we can arise simply by stopping to look at it. Before we go on, let's do that right now. Just look at your breath for just a second and see. Is it long? Is it short? So we all can see that collectively. It's something we can all accept and agree. Yep, I can see mindfulness. I see how this works. He then says you should raise this kind of awareness, this mindfulness, with every body posture, walking, standing, sitting, lying down, with clear comprehension in daily activities, full alertness in your actions and movements. So we do walking meditation to cultivate this. We do breathing meditation to cultivate this. But again, here's an example. He says, if you look for yourself, you can see sati. You can see mindfulness arise in your body. And we use the body as a good example because we all have one. So it's a good place to start. We can all agree on and look directly at it. He goes on to reflect on the body, and he says there's 32 different parts of the body, and he explains that, like hair and nails and spit and blood and guts and all the goodies. And he says, if you look, you can see all these parts of our body. We all have this. We can agree on that. And he says, looking at it, you should examine it just like as if you were looking at a bag of beans and rice. And you're like, oh, look, there's some things that are beans. Oh, there's things that are peas. Those are some things that are rice. And you can identify, yep, those are the parts. And we can do that right now. Let's do that collectively. Stop and look at your body and just gain some awareness. It's got solid parts and it's got fluid parts. And you can see directly heart, lungs, you can feel those things. Expanding that, he reflects on those are all similar things. They're all the same as the elements that we all see. There's watery parts, there's earth parts, there's solid parts. You get a fever, you know that you have a temperature, so there's a fire part to your body. And there's a wind part to your body too. If you eat broccoli, well, you're going to find out about the wind part, the upward and downward flowing winds, they say. He points out that those elements are the same as the elements that are outside. If it's raining, there's water. And if there's tears, there's water. And so there are parts of this that are internal to our that we identify with and external, and there are parts that are internal and external. And he says, looking at these things, we can collectively gain mindfulness that that is true and that those things change. That this breath is different than the last breath, that there are sometimes tears of joy and tears of sorrow, but that it's fluid. And so he says, as you recognize those things of your body, it's also important to notice that it is, in fact, changing and decaying. It gets old, it gets gray, it starts to come apart, and those elements that make up the body start to break down. Those parts of earth and wind and fire start to dismantle. And so he gives specific instruction on meditation, knowing that you're going to pass away one day, but looking at what happens when the body does that and understanding fully the whole process from a baby being born to dust in the wind. And he says, you can watch this entire process. We all experience this process, so you can see it directly for yourself right there in this foundation of mindfulness, your body. And so he says, how does a monk remain focused on the body in and of itself? With mindfulness of the body, we establish mindfulness that form, body, is internal, it is external, and it is both internal and external. And we can see that right now. There are things about my body that are internal, and there are things that are not separated from the external. They're part of my environment. We observe the phenomena of the rising and the passing away of form. My body is different now than it was when I was in high school. It'll be different again. It's different in the morning. It's different in the evening. It's different when I'm sick. It's different when I feel well. Or mindfulness is established just that form is, just that we are here, that there is a body, that there are elements, and we remain independent, not sustained by or clinging to anything in this world. That is how a monk remains mindful of the body in and of itself. And how does a monk remain focused on feelings in and of themselves? Well, we use the foundation of mindfulness of feelings. We begin by recognizing that feelings occur and that they are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And we just become mindful of that. In every body posture, day and night, we just become aware. And when we began practicing with this, we practiced this for a week, and I noticed, a lot of people noticed that practice being kind of powerful in and of itself. I'm having a feeling. I simply notice that it is a happy feeling. And then later I notice I'm having a sad feeling. So it's no longer that same happy feeling. It comes and it goes. We contemplate on the origin of feeling, discerning feelings from physical and non-physical origins. He describes this as feelings of the flesh and not of the flesh. So we recognize that there are bodily feelings, aches and pains and things that are pleasant or unpleasant, and there are emotional feelings that are also part of our experience. But they are all feelings. They're all some kind of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. There's something about the feelings that's that. Mindful reaction to feelings is recognizing these patterns so that we can practicing non-attachment to pleasant or unpleasant feelings. So he says, you recognize that these things come and go. There's not a lot of point in holding on to them. So you can let go of the unpleasant stuff and you can also let go of the pleasant stuff. And how does a monk remain focused on feelings in and of themselves? With mindfulness of feeling, we establish mindfulness that feelings are internal, external, and both internal and external. Again, feelings are influenced by both internal and external factors. We focus on phenomena of the arising and the passing away of feelings. We see that feelings come, that they exist for a while, that we experience them fully, and then they pass away. Or mindfulness is established that feelings simply are. We just note, I am having this feeling. This is what is happening. And you're just mindful that that is what's happening. And we remain independent, not sustained by or clinging to anything in this world. So again, same as before. He says, you'll notice this happens with your physical body. It comes and goes and changes. It's not the same, not even one moment to the next. Says the same about your feelings. He says it comes and goes, not the same, not even one moment to the next. And so clinging to that and sustaining yourself by feelings is kind of moot. And how does a monk remain focused on the mind in and of itself? Observing the mind, we see when the mind has passion, aversion, and delusion. And when he describes these things very specifically, passion, craving for something, aversion, not wanting something, and delusion, confusion about what is important to think about and not important to think about, or what it might help and what might not help. A lot of confusion. We see when those things exist in us and we see when they don't. So he's asking you to gain mindfulness of the mind just simply to say, I have passion. Not passion is wrong and I shouldn't be passionate, but oh, look, there's passion. I'm angry about this thing. It exists in me. There's anger. Not I shouldn't be angry, but there is anger. We see how these things arise and how they pass away. We recognize states of mind that are enlarged. We're having a sense of mind that is grasping big concept, or constricted. It's really focused on one thing and can't let go. Surpassed and unsurpassed, concentrated and not concentrated, released and unreleased. Those are some big words. He's inviting you to look. And so we can see this, and in some translation, we see that sometimes it's enlarged and sometimes it's constricted. Sometimes it feels surpassed and sometimes it feels unsurpassed. And sometimes I'm concentrated and sometimes I'm not concentrated. Sometimes I feel released and sometimes I don't feel released. And I see that really clearly. I see that it happens, and I just recognize. And how does a monk remain focused on the mind in and of itself? With mindfulness of the mind, we establish that mindfulness, the mind states are internal, external, and both internal and external. That there are elements of mind states that we can take as just totally internal, and I know this gets sticky, but there are influence. It's conditioned from things that are external. So there's an element of mind that is internal and an element that is external. We focus on the phenomena of the rising and passing away of mind states. One of the things that I love about this teaching is just that he acknowledges that even the Buddha says, yeah, your meditation isn't always going to be perfect. It isn't that you're going to reach one day of perfect meditation and then it's going to be great from then on. There are mind states that come and go in meditation, and we watch them come and go because they all do. Or mindfulness established simply that those mind states are. I recognize that I'm having a mind state, that I'm thinking. And we remain independent, not sustained by or clinging to anything in the world. So again, we see a foundation of mindfulness. We see that we've seen the body. It comes and goes. It exists in a certain way. And there's not really any point to clinging to it. It should stay one way because it's going to change. We've seen that with emotions. You're going to have, sometimes we have pleasant, sometimes we have unpleasant, sometimes we have neutral things happen. That's going to be the thing. It comes and goes, and we can see it just as it is. And again, whether it is your body, your emotions, your mind, we remain independent, not sustained by or clinging to anything in the world. And how does a monk remain focused on mental qualities in and of themselves? Here he describes mental qualities that we all experience. So he starts with the hindrances. These are the things that hold your meditation states back: sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, laziness, drowsiness, restlessness and mental worry. Sitting still and worrying doesn't help anybody. And doubt. And those are the parts of feeling unsure. Maybe this isn't what I need. Maybe that's what I need. That those states, he acknowledges, arise in everybody, and that they're something that we can see and experience and recognize as a mental quality. And he points out the aggregates, the pieces that come together to make these mental qualities, that there is form, feeling, perception, fabrications, and consciousness. So we looked at each one of these. We took each week, we looked at each one of these over the past few weeks, and we saw that um, each one of those places is a place where our mind makes contact and something can arise. And similarly, we saw that with the sixth sense basis. That you can see as he comes to the eye is where something makes contact, and it has its object that's connected to it, which is seeing. And this is a mental quality. So an object falls within the shot of the eye. You see this, you say, oh, that's a coffee cup. And the corresponding conjunction takes place. And he says, this is where you make contact with all those things in the world. And you can see that. You can see your eye and seeing, your ear and hearing, your nose and smelling, your tongue and tasting, your body and touching, and your mind and mind objects. And that is one of those foundations that you can bring your awareness to. And then the mental qualities of the 7 factors of awakening, gaining this mindfulness that we've been working on, using that to investigate the nature of things, the energy that comes from practice of seeing things clearly, the joy that you start to get filled with as some of these hindrances pass away, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity that are built out of strong meditation practice. These are the fruits of practice, but they're in this section of mindfulness here with mental qualities right alongside defilements. We can, or I'm sorry, hindrances. That's an interesting point. Hindrances, the clinging aggregates, the sixth sense bases, and the factors of awakening are all things that the Buddha recognizes as mental qualities. And he says, have some tendencies. How does a monk remain focused on mental qualities in and of themselves? We know when these mental qualities are present in us and when they are not. We see how these qualities arise and how they pass away. We see how unbeneficial qualities are abandoned, and we see how beneficial qualities are cultivated. And so at this moment in the sutta, he kind of shifts from where we've just been seeing those foundations of mindfulness, and he says, yes, but there's a thing you can cultivate here that's wisdom. We see that these are present or not present, so we can relinquish them and have them not be present, or we can cultivate them and have them be present. We can see how they come and go because we've learned our foundations of mindfulness, starting with our breath and seeing all these different key elements of what make us who we are. And so then we become aware of how these qualities are abandoned or cultivated. And how does a monk remain focused on mental qualities in and of themselves? This may sound familiar. With mindfulness of mental qualities, we establish mindfulness that these states are internal, external, and both internal and external. We focus on the phenomena of the rising and passing away of mind states. Where mindfulness is established that mind states simply are, and we remain independent, not sustained by or clinging to anything in this world. So interesting to come here to this part where we get to the factors of enlightenment, and they all sound so wonderful. And then he says, and those two pass away. Those two come and go. You will see those in your meditation, and they will cultivate. When you cultivate the good stuff, you'll cultivate the good stuff. When you cultivate the bad stuff, you cultivate the bad stuff. So there's a way to see it and cultivate it, and yet you should understand that they are things that arise, and so you can cultivate them, and they'll eventually pass away. So that concludes what is the foundations of mindfulness, Satipatthana. But that there are 2 suttas, the Satipatthana Sutta and the Maha Satipatthana Sutta. And Maha means great. So what makes this sutta great is that he has given us this key to understanding mindfulness, to understanding the practice of mindfulness. And he says, and now, if you apply those foundations of mindfulness and examine the Four Noble Truths, you will unlock suffering. That's what he suggests. And he says, he makes a claim. Buddha says that the problem that we all experience, that deserves our attention, that is noble and worthy of consideration, is the thing that we all experience, and that's suffering. He says birth, growing up, getting sick, getting old, and death are all filled with suffering. And in the meantime, we suffer when we're parted from the desired or united with the undesired. This is a fundamental part of life, but because of it, we all have a sense of dissatisfaction or suffering that pushes us. And the word he uses for this is dukkha, and we translate that to stress or suffering. But dukkha, as we found in our examination, is really the description of something that doesn't quite fit. It's the description of, the analogy is the wheel, the hole in the center of a wheel where an axle fits in. And if the axle doesn't quite fit, that it doesn't quite work. And so it makes for a bumpy ride. And so there's this essence of emptiness and whole being. And Buddha says the reason why we have this experience is because of tanha, or thirst. And tanha is a perfect translation, is the word thirst. He says mindfulness shows us that we suffer when things make contact with those senses and aggregates, and we thirst for them to be a good way, and we push them away because we don't want them to be. So back to those foundations of mindfulness that we've been looking at. He says, when your body changes, you kind of don't want it to change. Or maybe you have a feeling of you're really passionate. You really want to get something. And so you really, really want that. So you're having a feeling of passion. But whether it's your body growing old and coming apart, or that passion coming into birth and then growing old and falling apart, the root of our suffering is our wanting that to be different than it is. That things are constantly changing and we want them to be permanently good, so we thirst. And what is the noble truth of the cessation of stress? The remainderless fading and cessation, renunciation, relinquishment, release, and letting go of that very craving. And where, when being abandoned, is this craving abandoned? And where, when ceasing, does it cease? Whatever seems endearing and agreeable in terms of the world, that is where, when being abandoned, this craving is abandoned. That is where, when ceasing, it ceases. So he gives us the four foundations of mindfulness. And he says, we can all look and we can all agree that these are the things that make up who we are. Our body, and our ever-changing body and all of its parts and all of its connection to the elements and all the things. Our feelings, that are when our body comes into contact with things. Our mind, the idea and things that cultivate in our mind as we have contact with the body and the feelings. And these states of consciousness, these states that we experience, mind states that we develop. And he made it a point to show us that they all change all the time, that they're always coming in and they're always going away, and that there's a part of us that really wants, if it really wants that thing, it's just a thirst that exists and is causing our suffering. And so he says, abandoning that thirst is the answer. And he points out that the four foundations or frames of reference show us all these things rise and pass away. And because we can cultivate beneficial states and abandon unbeneficial states, we can abandon craving or aversion right where it arises, right at that contact with senses, right at the contact with your mind, right at the contact with feelings. That is where it can be abandoned. When you abandon that and you get good at abandoning that, pretty soon you don't crave and you're not averse all the time, and those things just don't happen. It just doesn't arise. Peace is established in this very life from seeing that in your own experience of hunger and thirst. So the noble truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering, the fourth noble truth, is the Buddha lays out a plan, and he says, okay, so establishing this mindfulness and building a life where you can live a mindful life, you can cultivate a life where this craving is abandoned and then suffering doesn't arise. And so the fourth noble truth, the third noble truth, is the promise that there is a place to exist without suffering. We can have a happy existence without aversion and clinging. That's the promise of the third noble truth. Fourth noble truth is, and here's how you go about making that happen. And he says, you start with this eightfold path. It's a way of living your life. And the example I used in my talk is that of origami. Because when we say eightfold path, people often try to think of that as steps in the path that, like, I'm going to take the bottom step to this next step to the next step, and then eventually I'll reach the top. Whereas it's really things that fold on each other. It's that I start with a good view and other things come together. So we start with right view. And right view is established when you see that thing that he pointed out over and over and over again. These things, they come into existence. They stick around for a while and they pass away. Clinging to those things stings, so don't do it. Pushing those things away doesn't really help. So the confusion that abounds out of that is not right view. And seeing that clearly is right view. He goes on to talk about right intention, building the intention that you're going to live your life in this way that's going to ease your suffering and the suffering of others, that you're going to put forward that effort. Right speech. We engage without saying things that are harmful or might cause pain. So we don't lie, we don't gossip, we don't say things that are mean. We try to cultivate things out of wisdom, because as soon as you say something mean, you've created a period of time where those negative emotions happen and somebody has to hurt. And that's going to exist for a while and then pass away. And we can see that that's created right from our speech. Then right there, as he says, right where it starts, you can end it by not having wrong speech. Same with right action. It's within our capabilities to do things that are wise and to not do things that are unwise. So right action is us engaging with the world in a way where we're doing the things necessary to ease suffering and ourselves and others. Right livelihood. The classic example is that of a butcher who comes to the Buddha and says, I'm a butcher and people eat meat. What am I supposed to do? And he says, well, can you at least not kill animals after work? Can you just promise that you won't kill things after work? He says, okay, I'll do that. And the Buddha gave that as a special dispensation because that practitioner was doing what he could to live his life in a right way. There's certainly jobs that you can have where you can engage in a good and positive way, and there are jobs that you can have that cause a lot of harm. And so if you want to live a life that eases your suffering and the suffering of others, right livelihood is an important part of that. Right effort means that you realize the importance of this thing, realizing out of right view and right intention and taking the steps to live your life in this way is right effort. You're engaging in the right effort of doing that thing. It does require that you raise the energy to say, you know what, I'm going to do it that way. I'm not going to do it this way. I'm going to not chase those things. And instead, I'm going to go to practice, or I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to gain mindfulness. Right mindfulness, we've discussed. And he goes on in further depth about exactly what right mindfulness is. And we developed these four foundations of mindfulness and seeing things come and go in real time as they are, noting, and right concentration. As you've developed these other things, as you've developed the positive energy that comes from right livelihood and right speech and right action and right view, and you've put out the right effort, and you've developed right mindfulness, all those negative energies, the defilements pass, and all those factors of enlightenment grow, and you experience deep states of concentration as a natural progression of your practice. Those things will arise and they will pass away. And seeing that with right concentration, that those things come into your life and you can see this thing happening and you can develop that amount of concentration, you can become aware that, yes, in fact, you have and are and continue to do things that alleviate the confusion that causes suffering, that makes it never arise in the first place. And so as a product of these things building upon each other, right concentration comes to be. there's a practical application. It's not, I really don't feel like the Buddha was out to say this is a crazy esoteric thing that you can only do in the jungle and your head's got to glow and you got to do it just like this. He was teaching everybody, lay practitioners. He just wanted to alleviate suffering in all beings. And so he was telling you how to do this in your life right now. And he said, so everyday practice is developing your concentration and your vipassana so that you can clearly see what's happening. See what's happening in those four foundations as it's happening. You apply your understanding in daily mindfulness to cultivate positive conditions and loving friendliness. So you're building a different way of life because you're cultivating a different thing. And then when obstacles come, and they'll come, when you suffer and when you delight, you use your wisdom to help you overcome inevitable difficulties, problems, and failures in life. And so that's the practical application of the Eightfold Path. Now, if anyone were to develop these four frames of reference in this way for 7 years, one of two fruits can be expected for them. Either gnosis, right here and now, or, if there be any remnant of clinging sustenance, non-return. Let alone 7 years. If anyone would develop these four frames of reference in this way for 6 years, 5, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, or even 1 year, for 7 months, for 6 months, for 5, 4, 3, 2 months, even 1 month, if half a month, one of two fruits can be expected for them. Either gnosis right here and now, or if there be any remnant of clinging sustenance, non-return. Let alone half a month. If anyone would develop these four frames of reference in this way for 7 days, one of two fruits can be expected for him. Either gnosis right here and now, and if there be any remnant of clinging sustenance, non-return. We've been doing this for 14 weeks, and I think everybody's really, really benefited from it. If we develop this practice, I think that you'll find that it is profound in your life. In other words, you can do this. You can see how things make up who you are and what you experience. Be present. You can see your body, lights, desires, memories, and heart clearly right now. And you can see your body, lights, desires, memories, and heart change already. This means you can be free from your clinging and thirst. You can be more resilient than your aversion right now. There's no point in clinging or pushing away. It's okay. It too shall pass. Freedom is yours already. Just let go lightly. It is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and distress, for the attainment of the right method, the realization of unbinding. In other words, the four frames of reference. Thus was it said. That is what the Blessed One said. Gratified amongst delighted in the Blessed One's word. Homage to the Blessed One, Worthy One, the rightly self-awakened One. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. And with that, I conclude our discussion of the Satipatthana Sutta and our overview of this wonderful practice. And I'm so grateful for it. It's been profoundly impactful to me, and hope all of you as well. We've had lots of good group discussion, and we still have a little bit of time if there's anything that y'all would like to chime in on about your experience with this. And I welcome any corrections as well. Anybody want to anything that they want to say, thoughts on this. So I welcome that discussion, and I'm super excited to see my good friend Ben practicing there at IIMC Redmond. And I think is that Ajahn Singto in the back? Nice to see you both. So with that said, anybody got something they'd like to add to the discussion?
Right. So it was a very good summary. So thank you.
Thank you. It's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff. We've been working on this stuff.
Yeah, excellent summary. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the extinguishing of suffering happening via like consciously trying to change a pattern versus accepting it exactly how it is, right? Because I think so much of this is, well, you're having or an emotion or a sensation or whatever, and like the judging and resisting it is causing a lot of the suffering versus accepting things exactly the way that they are, right? As you would desire them to be. And then with the cessation of suffering, is it because I feel like he actually has both perspectives in the sutta, and we've discussed both, but there's an element of dropping your resistance to whatever is happening. And then there's an element of like making a different choice. And those are
Yes.
different philosophies. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I would say different aspects, but not necessarily philosophies. So let's unpack that a little bit, kind of examine it together.
Yes.
So there's we can all you think of an experience where you've had something that's caused you to suffer. I can think of some things that where my heart broke, and in the minute of my heartbreak, there's a distinct moment of suffering, and I can note that. I can see it. Heartache. I could label it, and I can know that it's happening, and raise awareness that it's happening. And that's the first thing he says. He says, if you gain the mindfulness that you can even just see your breath is long and short, you can gain the mindfulness. This is happening. My heart is broken. And then you got to ask the question, it's like, what were the conditions that caused the heartbreak to arise? And what are the conditions that cause it to pass away? Because we can see that in everything always, that it arises and it passes away. So maybe my heart breaks and I can see that, but the things about it, why my heart's breaking, I mean, those things are raw. So it's very hard for me to deal with. All I can really say is there's an emotion and there are thoughts of heartache. It might take some time. But if I watch that, and that's his real advice, is just watching. Maybe it takes 3 months or 6 months or whatever. He's just saying, 7 days. You can watch that and you can see that thing happen and you can understand heartache. And one of the things about heartache is that there's something I'm clinging to. I wanted it to go this way, but it's going that way. And I wish it wasn't going that way. I wish it was going this way. And why can't it go this way? And so the thing is, I'm craving something to be away in the future or not be away in the past. That's why my heartache exists, right? So the first philosophy of the moment I'm experiencing the heartache, I see it clearly. Can I abandon it right there? Let go. Yeah, some, but there's also a condition that caused it to arise in the first place, right? So that condition is a little deeper usually. So we examine the condition that caused it to arise and we start to get an understanding of, I see, I misunderstood. I had thought it would go that way forever, but instead, how could it? Instead, it's going to go this way instead. And because I was confused and delusional, my heart hurt. Oh, now I understand differently. So then it happens again. And when it happens again, it doesn't arise. My heart doesn't break the same way because my wisdom has seen it. I've seen it come and go. I understand what happened. I've broken the delusion. So to answer your question, I think it's both. I think practice is both seeing it as it's happening, acknowledging this is something that happens, but then unraveling that dukkha, unraveling the thirst. Why do I have that thirst? Because the thirst is the root of the heartache, not the event, not the thing that's causing the heartache. It's the thirst behind it. If it didn't have the thirst, it wouldn't be a problem. So you got to ask, how does this arise? How does it pass away? And then look at the thirst. The better you understand the roots of that thirst, the less likely any suffering is to arise. Does that make sense?
Yes, thanks.
It's kind of that's a super long answer, but I think that's what this. I do think that's what he's saying. He's saying develop this mindfulness, and you'll see that comes and goes. So it's not. There's a fundamental flaw when we feel like there is something that we need to go do to make it better. That thing is dukkha. It's not good forever, and I need to go make it better. It is so fundamental that it's behind those bits of suffering. I've got to be doing something today to make things better. Because if I don't, then chaos, And that's true. But the chaos is going to be there, whether you like the idea or not. So, yeah, we practice. We see it come and go. Anybody else? It's like, careful. You're going to say something, and then Pete's going to go on again for another 10 minutes. Well, that is a summary of the Maha Satipatthana Sutta, and it's something to practice with. But that's the perfect question, Lena, because the truth is that that's what he's pointing to. He's not pointing to like, this is how you make a lot of money, because if you make a lot of money, then you'll be great. He's not saying this is how to have a perfect diet and be young and fit and healthy forever. He says the fundamental problem is that suffering, and what do we do about it? And he recommends this path of understanding to help unravel it. And I think all of the rest of the suttas are further discussion on this. Like this Maha Satipatthana is the core teaching of the Buddha. And all the other discussion is something that comes off of this teaching. So I hope you found it a benefit. I'll have to figure out what we're going to do next as a group. And we'll talk about this stuff some more. But for now, I'll conclude. And stick around if anybody wants to talk about this anymore. But for now, I'll do as we do every week and share our service presentation. And we can collectively reflect on universal well-being. Before I do this, like I was saying a second ago, all of the teaching is found in the Satipatthana. And if you read this blessing that the Buddha gives on loving kindness to share with all beings, it's all right here. It's all in this thing that we say every single week. The same thing. We want to abide in well-being. We want to be free from affliction. We want to see how those things come and go, and we want to cultivate the things that make them not arise and make the good things arise. So together, we'll reflect on universal well-being. May we abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may we maintain well-being in ourselves. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings be released from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their action and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action, and its results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, of such acts they will be the heirs. And as always, we'll conclude with salutation to Buddha. Araham sama sambuddho bhagava Buddham bhagavantam abhivademi. Swagato bhagavata dhammo dhammam namasami. Supatipanno bhagavato sāvaka sangho sangham namami. Well, there you have it. Good practice. Thank you for joining me on this long journey. I enjoyed it, and I hope you have too. And we'll look forward to practicing some more coming up next week. Come up with something good. All right. Have a great day. Goodbye for now.
Take care, everybody.